Hello there. Didn't see you there. I'm just deciding what I should watch for the summer, you know? I mean, I've got nothing else to do. I mean, I made a short film, but yeah, I've got to watch something. I guess since it's ended and everyone's talking about it, I could watch Game of Thrones. Yeah, that sounds like a plan. I'll go do that. You can, wait for the rest of the video to play. Have fun.
Uncle Benjamin.
How does Kit Harington keep his eyes open for that long? So after years and years of hearing people rave on and on about Game of Thrones, and after months of my mate Darin banging on about it as well, I finally bit the bullet and sat down and watched all 8 seasons of Game of Thrones. And what a show. This show is amazing. It may not have ended perfectly, but for what it did in terms of character development, long-form storytelling, and big budget effects on TV, it's just an amazing achievement. Now bear in mind, I've only seen the show once, so I might have forgotten some of the minor details. I also haven't read the book, so I can't provide any comparisons between the two, but with all that being said, let's just jump straight into it. The more I look back at Game of Thrones Season 1, the more I appreciate it. Right from the get-go, I knew that the show was going to be slowly paced. Not that slow pacing is a bad thing. I mean, Daredevil and Breaking Bad, my 2 favorite shows, have slow pacing. But I just didn't realize how slow and paced out this series was going to be. One thing that did surprise me was just how little the show did in terms of explaining the world to its audience. It doesn't give you a Lord of the Rings style opening sequence where it tells you who the good and bad characters are and what the state of the world is. It literally drops you straight in the thick of it, and you've just got to be paying attention. Especially with everything to do with Robert's Rebellion, because if you're not paying attention and you're not clued up about what happened, then certain reveals will just go right over your head. Like it did with me. Jon Snow's a Targaryen reveal. I really like the pilot episode. I think it does a really good job at establishing who our main characters for the show are. Jon, Tyrion, Ned, Robb, Theon, Sansa, Arya, Bran, Bobby B, Dany. It establishes the main threat of the White Walkers. Why did that subplot have to end so badly? It has that amazing scene where Ned Stark executes the deserter of the Night's Watch. It introduces the legendary character of
Uncle Benjamin.
And it ends with a cheeky bit of incest and attempted murder. Nice. That really set the tone for the show. For the most part, Season 1 is split into roughly 6 main subplots. Ned Stark's endeavours as Hand of the King in King's Landing, Jon Snow's time at Castle Black with the Night's Watch, Tyrion Lannister's wild adventures on his way back to King's Landing, Daenerys Stormborn of the House Targaryen's time with the Dothraki, Bran Stark's visions of ravens, and Robb Stark starting a war with the Lannisters after Ned Stark's execution. Essentially, the main storyline for Season 1 is Ned Stark's time as Hand of the King, and I find that subplot to be very interesting. Seeing the poor state of the kingdom under Robert Baratheon's rule was quite surprising, especially since he comes across as this upbeat, jaunty, and quite loud man.
You got fat.
You know, Bobby B is just so quirky that you really wouldn't expect him to be a bad king. Although the more we see of him, the more we start to realize that he's not entirely the nicest of people. What with the drinking and the domestic abuse? So I guess it's not all that hard to imagine. Now, the show is called Game of Thrones, and the later half of Season 1 shows us the Game of Thrones, and it's just so good. You're gonna hear me say that a lot, by the way. Ned Stark discovering that Robert's children are actually Jaime and Cersei's incest bastards, and then using that information to blackmail her, only for it to backfire on him and lead to his arrest for treason, was just so good. Like, oh my god. By the way, fuck Littlefinger, fuck Janos Slynt, and fuck Varys while you're at it too. Just kidding, I love Varys, but still, why didn't he set Ned free? He could have done it. I know it's for the good of the realm, but why did we have to lose Ned Stark? I mean, Ned Stark was just so honorable and just such a good guy that he could have, like, found his ace in the hole and stopped Cersei and Joffrey and beaten the Lannisters, but just... It was at this point in the show that I started to realize that maybe there weren't really many happy endings in Game of Thrones. Ned Stark's execution was quite interesting because I knew it was coming, so it didn't massively shock me. And he is played by Sean Bean, so I was expecting him to die at some point, but when you actually see it play out, you kind of just go, Oh no! What? No, Ned! It was even more shocking when we found out that Ned wasn't actually initially going to be executed. He was going to be sent to the Night's Watch until Joffrey, the little shit that he is, decides to chop his head off. Like, no! Imagine the story possibilities. Imagine if Ned was sent to the Night's Watch and reunited with Jon Snow. Imagine if Ned was at the Battle of the Wall or Hardhome. Imagine if Ned became Lord Commander, or he groomed Jon to become Lord Commander. It would have just been amazing, but just... no, this little shit ruins it all. Fuck you, Joffrey. Just isn't Joffrey such a little piece of shit? Jack Gleeson, honestly, is an amazing actor. Who knew that the kid from Batman Begins would grow up to be one of the most detestable men in Westeros? Just, he's so good. He truly makes Joffrey just this pathetic little, detestable little shit. First he tortures this innocent butcher's boy, then he gets Sansa's direwolf lady killed, then he goes and shows Sansa's Ned's head on a pike. This kid! But regardless of all that, I adore the effect Ned Stark's death has on the rest of the show, especially on the characters. Because not only does it start the Lannister-Stark war, but the moment where Catelyn walks in on Robb just hacking at this tree crying is just one of the best scenes. It's just so powerful. Also, Rip Serio, Arya's water dancing teacher, he was just a legend. What do we say to the God of Death? Not today. Now, I could honestly watch an entire show of Jon Snow and the Night's Watch. Just, it's so good. I love the camaraderie and the culture and the background of the Night's Watch. It's just so entertaining and I love it so much. I love how Jon immediately arrives there and has a chip on his shoulder, so he just decides to beat everybody up and kick their ass just to prove that he can actually do it. But thanks to some wise words from Tyrion Lannister, he then starts to befriend and become brothers with the men of the Night's Watch. It's just great stuff. Speaking of Tyrion Lannister, I just really enjoyed his interactions with Jon Snow. The little bond they formed was just so cool. And I especially loved the exchange they had in Winterfell where Tyrion tells Jon to wear his title of a bastard like armor. It's just one of my favorite Tyrion quotes. Now that we're on the subject of Tyrion Lannister, I'm just gonna say this right now, but seasons 1 to 4 of Game of Thrones simply is the Tyrion Lannister show. Tyrion is just the best character in all these 4 seasons. Peter Dinklage just carries the show on his shoulders. He's incredibly charming, charismatic, funny, witty, and just overall badass. I mean, this is a character who literally decides to travel all the way to the very edge of the world just to piss off the wall. Like, what a legend. There's also just a lot of fun things they do with Tyrion Lannister in season 1. He gets kidnapped by Catelyn Stark and is taken to the Eyrie where we meet Catelyn's sister Lysa and her son Robin, who is, well, to put it lightly, just a little bit clingy to his mother. Tyrion then asks for a trial by combat, which then introduces us to Sir Bronn of the Foot in Blackwater, who is just a goddamn legend. We then see Tyrion and Bronn become a comedic duo for X minutes straight. Tyrion and Tywin trick these clansmen into fighting a battle for the Lannisters. Tyrion gets Bilbo Baggins, which I thought was a very clever way to hide the low budget of the show. He then gets a whore for a girlfriend in Shae, and then he's made Hand of the King. Wow, Tyrion really goes through a lot this season, doesn't he? Let's talk about Daenerys, shall we? I initially wasn't too thrilled with her storyline at first. I just found it to be a little uncomfortable. I just felt that the first half was just really awkward, what with her getting sold to Khal Drogo, forced to marry him, and then getting raped by him on her wedding night. It was just uncomfortable. But as soon as Drogo and Daenerys started to fall in love with each other, and she starts standing up to her brother Viserys, who is just an absolute prick, I started to like her storyline a lot more. Especially in the back half when we get to the Magi and the blood magic. It's just so creepy and so sad. Especially when Dany's premature child was used as a blood sacrifice to bring Drogo back from the dead, but all it did was just make him brain dead, and so Dany decides to mercy kill him. It was really emotionally powerful. Although, what is it with rulers in the show dying from really anticlimactic deaths? You got Bobby B in the Boar, Khal Drogo and his infected cut. What's next? Renly Baratheon gets killed by a shadow monster? Now, I do think season 1 ends just a little bit anticlimactically. Don't get me wrong, there's some great setup for season 2. Robb Stark being crowned king in the north, Joffrey is still being a sadistic little shit, Daenerys giving birth to her dragons was a cool scene, but it's not how I would have ended the season. It just felt a little flat for me. I know that's how it happens in the books, but just for me, it just felt a little anticlimactic. Na 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 na. Season 2 of the Tyrion Lannister show continues, and it's just so great. It's even better than Season 1. Tyrion as Hand of the King just leads to some amazing moments between him, Cersei, and Joffrey. I love how he can literally just manhandle and mock Joffrey just because he's in that high position of power. It's so good. And when Tyrion is forced to lead the Battle of Blackwater after Joffrey just fucks off, it's just so good. He rallies the men and leads the charge single-handedly, and it just shows how great of a leader he really is. Just Tyrion Lannister. What a guy. Now, speaking of the Battle of Blackwater, let's talk about Stannis, shall we? Because I don't love Stannis. I like Stannis. He's a good character. It's just that I've never really felt like he should be the king. Even though he has the most legitimate claim to the throne, something about him just screams antagonist. Maybe it's because he's not the most charismatic, or maybe it's because he's trying to defeat Tyrion Lannister, my favorite. I just never got behind Stannis. You know, the more I think about it, the more I think it's just because he's trying to defeat Tyrion at the Battle of Blackwater. Like, screw Joffrey, screw Cersei, but messing with Tyrion is just a big no-no in my book. Now, the Battle of Blackwater itself is awesome. Tyrion is great, the action is great, and the Hound just solidifies himself as an absolute legend this season.
Fuck the king.
But the moment where Cersei is ready to poison Tommen to make sure that he doesn't suffer when Stannis breaks into the keep and takes over the city, is just such a great character moment. It just emphasizes the point that Cersei would do anything for her children and would make sure that she could protect them from harm at all costs. I also did enjoy Cersei's drunken speech she had with the women in the keep, especially when she's just so passive-aggressive towards Sansa. It's so great. Kudos to Lena Headey. Lena Headey? Lena Headey? Lena Headey. Whatever, kudos to her. She's just fantastic in this role. Daenerys' storyline in Karth was, well, it's a little drawn out, wasn't it? It's very stretched out. It's not bad, it's just not that eventful. Although I did love Dany's vision in the House of the Undying. I love how it visually shows us that she's ready to give up everything she's ever wanted. Drogo, her son, the Iron Throne, all in order to save her dragons. Now, Season 2 is where I start to lose track of the Jon Snow storyline. Just everything that happens from Season 2 to Season 4 just sort of blends together in my mind. I know that him and the Night's Watch go to Craster's Keep, and Craster is an absolute disgusting character. He rapes his daughters to give birth to more daughters so he can rape them. And on top of all that, if his daughters give birth to boys, he then sacrifices them to the White Walkers. Just, what a disgusting, filthy, vile, pathetic man. Just, ugh. But yeah, Jon also meets Ygritte and she's a great character. Just, I haven't got much to say about Jon in Season 2. I like the character and I like Kit Harington in the role. Arya's captured by the Lannisters and her time spent at Casterly Rock was just so good. Especially when she becomes cupbearer to Tywin Lannister. Their dynamic is one of the best things of this show, just period. It's so good. All their conversations are simply hordes of just amazing quotes.
Have you ever lost before?
Do you think I'd be in my position if I'd lost a war? You know what legacy means? It's what you pass down to your children and your children's children. It's what remains of you when you're gone. Are most girls more interested in the pretty maidens from the songs? John Q, flowers in her hair?
Most girls are idiots.
You remind me of my daughter.
Oh, it's so good. And we also meet the faceless assassin of Jaqen and Hagar, and he is just awesome. Just, the kills he gets are amazing, and just, what a great character. He's awesome. Robb Stark was also just a beast in Season 2. You know, he's just defeating the Lannisters left, right, and center, and he also falls in love with Talisa, a girl from Volantis, and that was a good romance. I thought that was quite well done. Robb Stark was just a solid guy and a great leader. At this point when I was binge watching the show, I just hoped that nothing bad would happen to him. How naive of me. Just, oh boy. Now, Theon Greyjoy betraying the Starks and seizing Winterfell in the name of the Greyjoys was just an absolute dick move. I mean, Theon wasn't one of my favorite characters coming out of Season 1. I mean, he was a bit of a prick at times, but his loyalty to Robb Stark was what kept him in my good books. But as soon as Theon betrays the Starks, fakes Bran and Rickon's death, gets Maester Luwin killed, kills 2 innocent farm boys and pretends that they're Bran and Rickon, just, he becomes an absolute dick. Oof. No pun intended. And who are you? The proud lord said that I must bow so low. So, yeah. A lot of things happen in Season 3 of Game of Thrones. Sam kills a White Walker with a dragonglass dagger, Jon bangs Ygritte, Jon takes the wildlings over the wall, only for him to betray them, Ygritte shoots Jon in the back 3 times, Bran meets Jojen Reed and his sister Mira, and they head over the wall, Joffrey is still a nonce. The Tyrells arrange for Marjorie, who was Renly Baratheon's previous wife, to marry Joffrey. Tyrion is forced to marry Sansa. Jaime and Brienne head to King's Landing. Jaime gets his hand cut off. He saves Brienne from a bear. That stuff was nuts, but in a good way. Lord Commander Mormont is betrayed and killed by mutineers on the Night's Watch. Dany buys the Unsullied army in the most badass way.
Dracarys.
She frees the city of Astapor. We meet Daario Naharis, who is played by Ajax from Deadpool at this point. We got the amazing Misa scene to close out the season. Lord Karstark kills some Lannister children who were being held prisoner as recompense for Jaime Lannister killing his son, which leads to his amazing execution scene by Robb Stark. This is also the season where Theon gets tortured by Ramsay and just... God, I feel so sorry for him at this point. Even after everything he did, he just didn't deserve to be tortured like this. Like, getting his dick cut off, like, man, that's just a step too far. You know, Arya and the Hound become a great comedic duo. Okay, fine, I'm stalling. It's season 3. What else do you want me to talk about apart from the Red Wedding? The Red Wedding was one of the most disturbing and perturbing things I'd ever seen, ever. Once I saw episode 9 of season 3, The Reigns of Castamere, I had to take a break from the show. Like, honestly, it just disturbed me so much. So Robb Stark agreed in season 1 to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters. Walder Frey is played by Filch from Harry Potter, which I found quite amusing. But as season 2 progresses, he ends up falling in love with Talisa and ends up marrying her. And after losing the Karstarks to his cause, Robb then has to fix the rift he created with Walder Frey. So he then agrees to get Edmure Tully to marry one of Walder Frey's daughters instead. But then, you know, they all head to the wedding and everything's all fine and dandy. We find out that Edmure is actually marrying one of Walder Frey's really attractive daughters. And then Edmure Tully, like, heads off for the bedding ceremony. Everyone's all like, way. The doors then shut and then the band start to play The Reigns of Castamere. And, well... basically, all hell breaks loose. Talisa, who is pregnant at this point, gets stabbed in the womb multiple times. Robb Stark gets shot with like a dozen crossbows. Stark soldiers are getting their necks slit. Blood's flying everywhere. Roose Bolton stabs Robb in the heart. Catelyn then executes one of Walder Frey's daughters and then gets her own throat slit. And just... it's an absolute bloodbath. It's just one of the most depressing moments in the whole of Game of Thrones. And we had season 8. It's even more depressing when you watch it in context because in the previous scene, Talisa and Robb are all getting happy and like they're saying, oh, we're gonna name the child Eddard, and it's all nice and sweet and they're all cute together and just, this happens, just, Now, I want to quickly talk about a character I've neglected for a little while, and that is the character of Jaime Lannister. I love Jaime. At first, I thought he was a bit of a prick because, you know, he kept banging his sister and then he kept walking around acting like he owned the place. He just came across as a bit of a douchebag. And then there's that moment in season 2 where he's in the cage and he's talking to his cousin and he comes across as this really nice guy. Until he just, you know, murders his cousin. Like, what the hell? But then season 3 rolls around and I am just in love with Jaime Lannister's character. He is amazing. His time with Brienne on his way back to King's Landing really just allows us to see that deep down, Jaime Lannister is a good guy. Yes, he may have tried to escape from her a couple of times, but deep down, when push came to shove, Jaime Lannister proved that he was an honourable guy. Like how when they're both captured by Locke's men and he manages to convince them not to rape Brienne. He may have lost his hand for it, but it does so much for his character. And then we get to the bath scene. The bath scene is where Jaime Lannister becomes one of my absolute favourite characters of the entire show. The way Nikolai Castor-Waldau performs this scene is simply phenomenal. Jaime is in this almost delirious state and recounts the time he killed the Mad King in order to save the lives of everyone in King's Landing and his father. And you cannot help but just fall in love with Jaime's character in this scene. I won't lie, by the end of season 3, I shipped him and Brienne together. This is also at the time where the writing for the show was just absolutely phenomenal. Don't get me wrong, the writing for the past 2 seasons had been phenomenal. It's just that season 3 takes it up to a whole nother level. I mean, some of these quotes and lines are just...
You do well to remember that, you little monster.
Oh, I'm a monster. Perhaps you should speak to me more softly then. Monsters are dangerous, and just now kings are dying like flies.
I am the king! I will punish you.
Any man who must say, I am the king, is no true king. The king is tired. See him to his chambers.
The writing is so good.
And so he spoke, that Lord of Castamere.
Here we are, Game of Thrones Season 4, my favourite season. For me, this is when Game of Thrones was at its peak. Everything from the story, to the characters, to the action, to the music was just, so perfect. Let's talk about everything that happens at King's Landing, shall we? Joffrey finally dies! Like, yes! Thank God! Like, good riddance to that little shit. Thank you, Olenna Tyrell and Lord Peter Baelish. I mean, the cruel shit that he pulled at his own wedding just made me angry. Especially since he was treating my guy Tyrion like absolute shit. Then there's also Tyrion's trial scene, which again is just another spectacularly performed scene by Peter Dinklage. I mean, this line is so good.
I did not kill Joffrey, but I wish that I had. Watching your vicious bastard die gave me more relief than 1,000 lying whores.
And Shay's betrayal was rough. I mean, you really feel Tyrion's heartbreak when she lies about him and Sansa plotting to kill Joffrey. Then there's Tyrion's trial by combat, where Prince Oberyn of Dorne decides to fight for him in order to defeat the Mountain, the man who raped and killed his sister, Elia Martell. And that fight was, let's say, intense. Although I do have one little nitpick, and that is just there's way too many cuts where you can tell that Pedro Pascal is not the guy doing all the flips. It just keeps cutting so much where I'm just like, yeah, I know that's not Pedro Pascal doing that. But anyways, the fight is awesome regardless of that. And I knew something bad was going to happen because Oberyn kept, taunting him, just like, confess, you must confess. Didn't expect this shit to happen.
I killed her children. Then I raped her. Then I smashed her head in like this.
Like, that was horrifying. Oh my god. And I liked Oberyn as well. Pedro Pascal is awesome. Just, oh man. I mean, now, whenever somebody mentions Prince Oberyn, you can't help but just think of this line.
You raped her. You murdered her. You killed her children.
I also love seeing the brotherly dynamic between Jaime and Tyrion this season. You just have so many great moments between the two, and you can just feel the chemistry between one another. Especially in that last scene where Jaime frees Tyrion. And you've also got amazing moments like this. Smash the Beatles! Smash them! It's so good. You've also got that scene where Tyrion finds out that Shay's been banging Tywin, and he just snaps and strangles her to death, and that scene is just brutal. You can just see the wide spectrum of emotion on Peter Dinklage's face, the regret, the anger, the pain, just phenomenal acting. And you've also got the scene where Tyrion confronts his father on the privy, and this scene is impeccable. The dialogue between the two is just masterful. Peter Dinklage and Charles Dance's performance against one another, it's incredible. It's just such a great scene. And this dialogue exchange?
She was a whore.
Say that word again.
And what? You'll kill your own father in the privy? No. You're my son. Now, enough of this nonsense.
I am your son, and you sentenced me to die. You knew I didn't poison Joffrey, but you sentenced me all the same. Why?
Enough. We'll go back to my chambers and speak with some dignity.
I can't go back there. She's in there.
Are you afraid of a dead whore? You're no son of mine.
I am your son. I have always been your son.
Flawless. So Daenerys' storyline in Meereen is fine. I just find it compared to the others a bit lackluster. I mean, all she does is just sit and rule. Like, that's cool, but come on, why don't you go head to the Iron Throne that you've been talking about so much? I mean, there is some nice conflict there where Daenerys has to actually learn how to rule and listen to the demands of the people, like how when sheep and children are getting killed by her dragons. It's good, it just feels a bit padded. But I did like the scene where she had to banish Jorah because he was spying on her in season 1 for Robert Baratheon. And it is sad because you feel for Jorah because he's devoted to Daenerys, he loves her, and he's not that person anymore, but just, it's a really good moment between the two. Then you've also got the stuff that's happening between Ramsay Bolton and Theon Greyjoy. No, not Theon, Reek! And seeing what Theon has become is just depressing. Yes, he may have betrayed the Starks, and yes, he may have killed 2 innocent farm boys, but just seeing what he's become, it's just really just unsettling. You've also got Arya traveling with the Hound, and that stuff is just great. The fuck salami. That all leads to the Hound versus Brienne, which was just an amazing fight sequence. And it also leads us to the moment where Arya Stark decides to leave the Hound for dead instead of killing him, because I think, and this is just my interpretation, that throughout the season she's actually grown to care for the Hound and no longer wants to actually kill him. But now let's talk about the highlight of season 4. The Jon Snow storyline. Everything they do with Jon Snow is just so good. Seeing Jon take back Craster's keep from the mutineers was just so satisfying. I mean, that head stab. Oh, it's so good. And then we get to episode 9 of season 4, The Watchers on the Wall. The battle on the wall between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings is my favorite episode. It was simply badass. You've got giants and wildlings on one side of the wall trying to get over, you've got the climbers getting knocked out by that massive ice spike, and then you've got the Thens and the other wildlings trying to break down the main gate, and Alistair Thorne gets injured, so Jon has to then lead the Night's Watch, and Jon fucking Snow just owns it this episode. I mean, the best part is when he's in the lift and he's just descending down, he gives Sam the key to unlock Ghost's pen, he then does this badass combat roll and just starts swinging Longclaw left and right, and I adore that kick move he does. It's just so sick. Then there's this amazing one-take shot. He then fights Steer, you know, the creepy cannibal guy with the scars, and that fight was just intense. You know, Jon loses Longclaw, and as soon as that happened, my heart started to race. He gets his head smashed into an anvil, but then he manages to get a hammer and smash it over Steer's head. It's just awesome. And then you've got Ygritte's death, which was a sad moment. Jon and Ygritte finally reunite, and she lowers her bow only for Ollie to kill her. Poor Jon. But at least this shot is really pretty. We've also got Jon Snow going beyond the wall to kill Mance Rayder, only for Stannis to come in at the last moment and intervene and save his life. And it sets up season 5 pretty well, because when we see Stannis burning the bodies, and we see Jon and Melisandre staring at each other from over the flames, we all know she saw something in the fire. For the night is dark and full of terrors. I'm just gonna say this now, but season 5 of Game of Thrones after season 8 is probably the weakest. It's just so padded out and long-winded. Not much happens until that back half of the season. At this point, Dany's company in Meereen just becomes dull at this point. I mean, really. Who gives a damn about the Sons of the Harpy? She's been there for like 3 seasons now. Like, come on, girl. Get on your dragons and fly over to Westeros and take that Iron Throne. The only saving grace of that subplot is when Tyrion joins Dany and Meereen and brings some much needed levity. Oh, and his time with Jorah was pretty good too. I loved it when they were entering the fighting pits and like Jorah just proves how much of a beast he is. That was good. This is also the season where Tyrion starts to look like Luke Skywalker from The Last Jedi, which I just find to be very amusing. Another weak point for season 5 for me was everything to do with the High Sparrow. Don't get me wrong, there are some great monologues and some great speeches, and it does lead to some great moments like Cersei's Walk of Atonement, but just, I'm sorry, once you've had one High Sparrow conversation, you've basically heard them all. And the Dawn subplot, oh my god, what even was that? I know it gives us some top quality banter between Jaime and Bronn, but aside from Marcella dying, it was a bit pointless, wasn't it? Now I know it seems like I'm just hating on season 5 and I think it's utter garbage. I don't. There are some great moments in season 5. I like Sansa's time with Littlefinger, and I found it fascinating because he basically dyes her hair black to make her look more like Catelyn Stark, which is just really creepy. Especially when he keeps kissing her, just like, stop. He then manipulates her into marrying Ramsay Bolton, and that entire thing was just fucked. Ramsay rapes her and gets Theon to watch in the corner. That is just... I hate Ramsay. Ramsay is an absolute shithead. He's worse than Joffrey, just... I'm saving my rage for season 6. But at least finally Theon steps up and helps Sansa escape by the end of the season. Like, finally, Theon's back. I did like Arya's time in Bravos as well, training with Jaqen and Hagar to be a faceless assassin. Yeah, it's a little padded out, but it's pretty good. Plus, we get this gem. Oysters, clams, and cockles! Oysters, clams, and cockles! That's my Arya Stark impression. But again, for me, the best part of this season is everything to do with Jon Snow, Stannis Baratheon, the Wildlings, and everything that happens at the Night's Watch. This season is just full of phenomenal moments for Jon Snow. From being made Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, to denying Stannis' offer to be legitimized as a Stark in order to fulfill his oath as a member of the Night's Watch, to see him mercy kill Mance Rayder just as he's being burnt alive, to him executing Janos Slynt. And that scene is the most badass thing in particular. I honestly love it so much. I love how this is the scene where Jon takes Stannis' teachings of fear into account, because we all know that Jon can be a bit merciful at times. And when Janos Slynt starts begging for mercy and then Jon hesitates only for him to just chop off his head and getting Stannis' nod of approval, it's so good. I love that scene so much. It's one of the scenes that I go back and rewatch often because it's just that good. And then there's Hardhome. Hardhome was one of the most intense episodes of Game of Thrones ever. When the storm clouds arrive and they start rumbling, you can't just help but feel a little bit anxious. You get that little bit of anxiety in your chest. And then when we see the reveal of the White Walkers and the Night King, you can't help but just feel the entire atmosphere of the scene just change. Jon Snow versus the White Walker is definitely one of the top moments of the entire show. It's such a good sequence. From Jon desperately trying to grab the dragon glass, to the White Walker just manhandling him, to, of course, this moment. Oh my god, the sound design is exceptional. And fucking finally, we finally get payoff to what Valyrian steel actually does. It kills White Walkers. For many seasons now, they'd all been going, oh, it's made of Valyrian steel, it's made of Valyrian steel, Valyrian steel, Valyrian steel. I'm like, whoop-de-fucking-do. What does Valyrian steel even do? And then we get this payoff that it kills White Walkers just, oh, it's just so good. Oh, and who else thought of this scene from Lord of the Rings: Return of the King when that moment happened?
That line was broken. It has been remade.
And the moment where the Night King walks out onto the pier and raises the dead was just such a chilling moment. This is also the scene that sparks my hatred of the Night King. I don't know why, there's just something about the Night King that just extremely pisses me off. Maybe it's the fact that he doesn't talk, maybe it's the fact that he has this constant smug look on his face, or maybe it's the fact that he's just OP as fuck. I don't know, but he just pisses me off. Now, before we talk about the shocking ending to Season 5, let's talk about Stannis burning his daughter alive, shall we? Because I actually quite like it. I know book fans don't like it, and they say book Stannis would never do that to his daughter, but I think for the character that they have in the show, it works. Stannis has always been a bit morally ambiguous in my eyes. The scene itself is just incredibly horrific. Shireen's screams of absolute pain and terror are just chilling, and I love what it does for Davos's character moving forwards. Now, we know that Stannis loves his daughter, but I just think that it works for the show because it just shows how far Stannis is willing to go in order to get the Iron Throne. And of course, it all goes wrong, his army deserts him, he then gets bollocked by Ramsay Bolton's army, and he ends up dying. But even still, Stannis goes out like a boss. Even when he's wounded, he still manages to take out a dozen soldiers single-handedly before he's killed by Brienne. Oh, and I like that we actually give Brienne something to do, because, you know, all she's just been doing is just been wandering around the wilderness in search for Sansa with Podrick. But let's talk about the ending, shall we? Now, I knew that Jon Snow died. That was no secret. I heard about that years ago. But the thing that did surprise me was how he was just betrayed by his own men, particularly Ollie, a man who Jon took in under his own wing, and he stabs him in the heart. What the fuck, Ollie? You little shit. The further watch scene is genuinely just depressing. All Jon wanted to do was make peace between the Night's Watch and the Wildlings, and make sure the Wildlings got safely over the wall so they didn't become part of the Night King's army of the dead. And he gets murdered for it. Fuck you, Alistair Thorne. And what makes it even worse is that Alistair Thorne uses Uncle Benjen's name in vain. Like, what the hell? Don't you dare use Uncle Benjen's name in vain. Just... I can't believe that Jon Snow died!
I don't want it. I never have. I don't want it, and that's what I told him.
I don't want it. I never did. You are my queen. I don't want it. I never... Just shut the fuck up.